Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Paul Cunningham, Capricorn Control. The time is 3 minutes after 6 Eastern Daylight Time. We're at T-minus 30 minutes and counting, and this is Capricorn Control. You were go for inertial guidance and ohms checks.
Roger, Houston.
You look at what we've meant to this country. Nobody gives a crap about anything anymore. People close their garages and triple lock their doors, hide under the beds. They're even afraid to turn on their television sets for fear of what they might find out in the evening news. There's nothing more to believe in. Now, you want to blow this whole thing wide open? God knows what it might do to everybody. I'm sorry. I'm so goddamn sorry. I just don't know what else to do. I'm hanging on by my fingernails, just like everybody else. Go on. You want to be the ones who give everyone another reason to give up? Go on.
This is really wonderful. But we go along with you and lie our asses off in the world of truth and ideals as protected. But we don't want to take part in some giant rip-off of yours, and somehow or other we're managing to ruin the country. You're pretty good, Jim. I'll give you that.
No. You're twisting my words.
Don't sell yourself short.
Don't sell the program short.
Don't oversell it. I'm not so sure that canceling a flight or cutting off appropriations means America folds up.
It's not as simple as that, and you know it.
I don't know it. If the only way to keep something alive is to become everything I hate, I don't know if it's worth keeping it alive.
Please, Brew. Don't talk like that.
What the hell's the matter with you? Please, Brew, don't talk like that. I don't think this is right. All the rest is bullshit.
You're out of my hands. You think it's all a couple of loony scientists. It's not. It's bigger. There are people out there, forces out there, who have a lot to lose.
Specifically a conversation between the crew and their wives. This is the first time the crew has been close enough to Earth to make normal conversation feasible. This is Capricorn Control.
It's Sharon.
I told you never to call me here.
Are you feeling well?
I'm feeling very well. How's Sandy?
She's got the part of Wendy in her school play. They're doing Peter Pan.
That's terrific.
You sound so close. It's hard to believe you really are that far away in space.
It's hard for me to believe it, too.
Brew?
Hello, King.
We're all so proud of you. Can you hear me, Brew?
Yes?
I'm not sure, Brubaker.
Keep watching.
Brew, I have a surprise for you.
What?
I said I have a surprise for you.
What is it?
Charles wrote a composition in school, and he won an award. May I read it to you? Brew, can you hear me?
Yes, please read it to me.
It doesn't look good. Do you want me to cut the transmission?
Not until I tell you.
My Father, by Charles Brubaker, Jr. My father is far away from me now. He is flying to Mars. I miss him very much. I always miss him when he goes away. I'm not sad, though. I used to be sad when he went away. One day he told me something. He said that people can't live only for themselves. He said that he was trying to do something that would be good for everybody. I know that is what he is doing now. He is doing something for everybody to give them a better life. That means he is doing something for me, too. So even though he is far away, he is thinking about me, and I am with him. That is why I'm not sad. That is why I'm so proud of my dad. And I love him so much.
Craft disintegrated within 12 seconds after the loss of the heat shield.
Right now, Kellaway is making a speech about what brave, wonderful guys we were.
I cannot adequately describe how we feel. These men were an integral part of a family here in the program.
Anybody ever sees us again and the whole thing falls apart.
I don't think your husband is the kind of man who makes mistakes, no matter how far away he may be. I think he was trying to tell you something.
What?
What did you do at Flat Rock?
We took some home movies.
Do you have them?
Yes?
May I see them?
Yes. They were making a movie the day we were there. Brew got a big kick out of it. He never knew it took so much time to just do one simple scene. Brew was fascinated with the detail. He couldn't get over how something so fake could look so real. He kept on saying that with that kind of technology, you could convince people of almost anything.
These three men reminded us of the limitlessness of our hopes. There was a moment these past few days when we were all one people. We were all hoping. We were all a little bit taller, a little bit prouder. We were all feeling the same fears and the same exhilaration. These three men brought us together. We knew together that there are no goals we cannot reach if we just reach for them together. There is no adequate way in which we can express our gratitude to the men themselves because they are no longer among us. However, we can serve their memory, what they stood for, what
Hey, thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoy. Tell a story of my recent travels, and then another story I think that is insightful for some of the psychology that's happening around us on this pandemonium. I also mentioned a company that's providing turnkey solutions for repatriation. I said to South America, but I think they're actually focused on Central America. They're called ECI Development, and they've been really, really responsive to inquiries as well. Two comments. One is that I think the pattern through the entire recording is that there's an underlying issue, and this isn't exactly age specific, but it's much more pronounced with the millennials, I'm noticing, 35 and under or so, and that is like this meta ADD. It's like there's a whole generation of people that have attention deficit disorder, and the story that I tell, I mentioned that the guy was triggered and I couldn't understand why, but I suspect, I'm almost positive, he was actually triggered because I was trying to ignore him. So I was doing everything I could to ignore him. So I just wanted peace. And to him, that was an act of aggression, trying to ignore him. So I think that is underlying a lot of what we're seeing right now. Some of these people that are suffering this massive ADD, if you're not giving them some sort of positive praise, if you're not feeding their narcissism, essentially, they're going to look for ways to get attention in other ways, like a child, like a 2-year-old would do. And finally, the entire recording is very positive. I focus on the positive. I didn't want to depress anybody. I'm also in a very positive space at the moment. But I think it would be remiss for me not to say what I think the state of things is, because I don't want to gloss over it. I believe strongly that we are in the middle of World War III right now. If you ever wondered what you would behave like during wartime, you can just look at what you're doing now, and that's what it is. And World War III is a psychological propaganda war. It's a war for hearts and minds, which is normal in wartime. You know, I've not ever been in a war zone, but the stories, they play things on the announcers, and they do flyers, and then they try and capture the youth and re-education camps and all these things. I believe that's what's happening right now, and I believe the next waves, it's just going to keep getting more and more obvious. I don't know the exact sequence of events, but the financial collapse is coming, so the entire people's, so the dollars in the markets will crash. I mean, it's just being supported artificially right now by printing money, and people are already, small and medium businesses and any large businesses that aren't in on it, quote unquote, they're all being destroyed. So there's mass layoffs everywhere. So now so the property values will quickly evaporate. And then you've got a really spiritually destroyed culture, and then you just get them hooked on these, like, what do you call it, social credit scores, like in China, and you just have these slaves by digital everything. That's the way I see it playing out. I don't know how quickly, but it just seems like they're setting the pace. Like, in terms of speed, it's just as fast as they can make it happen. That's why if there's a lull, it's the chance to wake everyone you possibly can up to go off grid and get back to nature, and seek out networks that are off grid and back to nature. That's my advice. Sorry to be a bit of a downer. I mean, the words that are coming up around the oligarchs is Bolshevism, and I never studied it directly, but I've had enough exposure. Like, that's just the absolute worst hell on earth, the way the Bolsheviks rolled through Eastern Europe back in the day. So if you wanna scare yourself, do a quick DuckDuckGo search on Bolshevism, and you'll get an idea what's coming. But they don't have to. In most places, they don't have to, because they've already won the psychological war. I don't mean it's over, but they don't need force. They just need messaging. People are just falling for the messages. So if you always wanted to know what it's like to live in an occupied territory, I believe that's coming if we don't wake enough people up and get people taking right action. Sorry to be a downer, but the whole podcast is upbeat. All right, we'll see you in a week. Connect in a week. Good day. Welcome back. It's been some time since I've shared a blast. I've got a few personal updates. I would like to start with some serious positivity, talk about some of my observations. I've had a chance to see many nations now. Must be around 6 or 8 if you include my contacts with Canada. And then US is getting a lot of coverage, so you can kind of get a gist of what's happening there. So I think I have a unique perspective on some of these cultures and how they're handling this whole thing. I will tell you about my recent little travel journey. It's much smaller than my last one, but I think it's illuminating in some ways, actually, in terms of the zeitgeist of the times. And then just a few bullets on what I think some of the underlying issues that are going on, some of the underlying psychology from my perspective. And then I will wrap up with a quote from Dr. E. Michael Jones again, who to me is just absolutely hitting it out of the park. And he's the only one that I've heard. It's a lot like Dr. Peterson. He was hitting it. To me, he was nailing it. And then Dr. Jones is even more fastballs into the strike zone. So I'll get into that. The movie at the beginning there was Capricorn One, and I'll have a couple of observations about that story. It's definitely a resurrection / Plato's Cave story as well. But in terms of positivity, one of the most positive experiences I've had recently was this summit. I did this online summit, virtual summit with the Dollar Vigilante. I'll share the links. I think you can still see the tapes. And the value of that for me was a whole tribe of people that not only are sort of, philosophically aligned, but they're all taking action to align their lives and help other people align their lives. To me, it was completely invaluable in terms of the connections in the network, and I hope they can keep it up. They sent out all the links to all of the experts that spoke, and then there was a whole bunch of so in terms of the actual talks, the substance of the talks were good, but it was more just getting the gist of where these guys were coming from and their philosophies on what's happening, and then subscribing to their newsletters and things. And I got a lot of value out of the offhand remarks. I get so jazzed when I feel like I'm sort of interconnecting with what the new world will likely be, which is this honest, peer-to-peer, no masters, no slaves, honorable business practices like bartering. You're kind of going back 50 years. You never had to have all these intermediaries with all these, a lot of them government agencies, police, regulatory, all this stuff. If people are just dealing with each other, especially in their local communities, they're going to deal honestly, right? Generally. And that's the message Peterson used to say on eBay. It's like they originally thought everyone was going to be trying to rip everybody off, but they found the exact opposite. It's like 99.99% approval ratings, because everybody knows that dishonest practices aren't sustainable. So who wants to, get a bad reputation? So when I'm touching that kind of energy, which is this honest peer-to-peer bartering future, I get really, really jazzed and optimistic. And crypto, to me, crypto is all over the shop. I think there's some of the old suspects are trying to figure out how they're going to control it and manipulate it. And then there's other ones that are pure to the original pure philosophy of crypto, which is unregulated, honest, peer-to-peer, transparent value exchange. So that's going to settle out in the next 12 months or so. But, I just don't think there's any way around it. There's enough purists that it's going to survive. So I'm a big fan. And in these African countries that I've been traveling in, they've been having this system, this SMS system on their phones that they've been doing, that are connected to the banks, which is also sort of regulated by the government. But it's very close for crypto to be interfacing with these mobile pay apps and just bypassing all of that bureaucracy. And you get total control over your financial savings and situation. And to me, that's so optimistic. So I get excited about that, and I'll save the links about this dollar vigilante. I guess I can give you a quick list from the presentations in the summit. There was a group that have done these turnkey solutions to help people repatriate to South America. I think there was Nicaragua, Belize, Puerto Rico. I think Mexico might have been on that list, but Panama definitely. And they have this package where you invest in this teak economy, and they'll help you invest a fee, basically. They help you invest in this teak economy, so it's like investing in the local production. They help you with residency, and they help you with property. So it's a really great concept for people that are thinking about escaping. But there were a whole bunch like that. There was one guy that was an organic garden, how to just completely survive on wilderness composting and things. There were a couple of guys on crypto. There were a couple of guys on philosophy, basically. And then there were a couple of guys that are just like Dollar Vigilante. So they're competitors in a way, but they're co-opting because everybody needs the help. So there's one guy who's called the Reset Sniper. He was much more technical analysis about the impending financial collapse, but the exact same space as Dollar Vigilante. And there's a guy, Perpetual Assets. He was excellent. To me, his message and perspective and position is completely resonating with mine. Seemed to be about my age. I think he's in Singapore. He might be based in the USA, but his business is in Singapore. You can buy bullion, gold and silver, and have it in vaults in Singapore. And then you could borrow against it if you even want to. And you could take your loan and invest it in crypto if you want. I mean, that's the ultimate leverage if you wanted to be really ballsy. But everyone's looking for a safe place to put their money, and precious metals has always been one of the safest, of course. So that was another great one. But anyway, I'll share those links. It was just that it was all based on constructive action for the right reasons, with a similar philosophy, which is like do no harm, but take no shit. That kind of philosophy. So it was a really nice resonance, and I think they'll probably start to do them more often. I don't know what the price is to watch it on replay. It's definitely worth it for the tribe aspect for me. Ebook I'll share also. It's called The Market for Liberty. And it's all about what true free market looks like, which is completely honest peer-to-peer. No need for government, no need for agencies, no need for regulatory, no need for police, no need for guns, no need for violence. The other positive aspect, which is, I guess, higher level, is when I'm having my most optimistic outlook, I think, there's somebody near the top that's doing all this terrible, destructive activity, but it's sort of like they're doing it for our own good, And the own good is, I think the outcome, if you embrace it, surrender, and evolve with this, is I think we're all going to get cured of our narcissism and self-absorption. I think that, so that's the positive. But I think to survive this thing, that's what's going to happen. The people that are truly awakening are going to have their philosophies straight, and they're going to have to know about property rights and defending their family and property from government overreach, and they're going to have their own sovereignty, their own personal sovereignty, and understand their own agency over their own body. All those kinds of things. And not only that, but defend others, defend the weaker people who are being violated against. So if it actually was truly resolved, you would just see so much altruistic behavior. Like we've seen some of it already. You're seeing it all the time. These guys that they hear that government agencies are beating up on a single mom who's trying to open her barbershop or her hair salon, and they offer their services. They go with their weapons and they stand out front and they protect her from getting bullied by the local agencies, that kind of thing. We should be seeing that everywhere very soon if we want to overcome the tyranny that seems to be happening at the moment. So that's the good news. The bad news is I also ask myself, how far do we have to go? If that's the ultimate goal, to heal us of our narcissism, how, as a culture, how far do we have to go? And it feels like we have a long way to go, right? People are still attached to their creature comforts, their Netflix and porn, and they don't want to wake up. They don't want to see reality. They don't want to stand up for themselves. They don't want to stand up for their neighbors, They don't want to stand up against tyranny. They just don't want the hassle. So what I'm seeing, Mark Passio made a really good point that, like, it's no fun saving yourself. You gotta save everybody you possibly can. But what I'm seeing is like two camps. There's a group of people that are fundamentally nihilistic on the inside, and they're quite happy to go along with everything. And they don't mind if it's their own total self-destruction. I don't understand, personally, that frame of mind. There's a lot of people that seem to be going that way. I don't know what it would take to snap those people out of that track. I'm seeing like these two tiers. There's this one tier of people that are sort of in the gray area, and they're awakening, and they're starting to ask questions, and they're starting to take action, which is so positive to see. And then there's this other tier that are just doubling down. They're doubling down on self-absorption, and they'll just be good little slaves. They're happy to be good little slaves as long as they've got some creature comforts and they can tell themselves that they're being a good person while they go along with everything and watch innocent people be persecuted. So that's, I guess, the positive and the negative. The positive is, I think the ultimate end is there's going to be a massive awakening. There has to be. Obviously it's happening everywhere. But the downside is it's still a long way to go before really you start to see this, what do you call it, silent majority kicking into gear and realizing that they have to stand up for themselves, their family, their property, and their neighbors, and govern themselves. That's the positivity. In terms of my travel experience, it was like one of the most dramatic contrasts I've ever experienced between what people are saying is on the other side of the border and what's actually on the other side of the border. But I told you I was in one developing nation in Africa, and now I'm in another one, a neighboring one. I crossed by road. And the one I was in, they were falling for it. The government's completely corrupt. They're a very capitalistic culture, but they've been really, really hammered by trauma in media in the last decade since I used to visit more regularly. Like, their culture has taken a complete shift. It's consistent with a lot what I'm seeing, like, generationally. Their millennials are just like the millennials you run into in Vancouver or Seattle. It's almost like they have a chip on their shoulder. They're looking for a shortcut. They're narcissistic, egotistic. They don't want to learn anything. They don't want to ask anything. They don't want to apprentice. And if there's a fair deal, if it's like, yeah, okay, handshake, you do this service for my money, that's great. If it ends up being fair and both are happy, they feel like they're being ripped off. This is a little bit of I'm reading into it a little bit, but that's how it seems like to me. They're not happy until they think that they took something extra from you. So if you're happy that you paid a fair price for a fair service, they feel like they didn't take enough from you. They want you to feel like you got a little ripped off, that you should have never trusted them in the first place. That's roughly what the take is on these the millennials where I just was. But I'm seeing that attitude a lot of places, and there's a whole lot of psychology behind that. I have said before, I think it has a lot to do with strong fathers aren't in the home, especially for the guys. They're growing up without an ethos. And so they end up distrusting older guys, envious, resentful, spiteful sort of. And I think they have the very similar attitude towards the higher power, whatever word you want to use for that. So they're atheistic. They think they cling to science as their belief system, and money and looks, and that leads them towards narcissism and nihilism, in my opinion, fundamentally. I don't know how these people are going to get healed by this. I don't know how they're going to snap out of it. But I was very disappointed, generally, culturally. But in terms of that travel experience, so I was talking for a few weeks that I wanted to cross the border. I heard this bordering country has kicked the WHO out. They've banned any masks or gloves or any of this craziness. So I wanted to just get away from it, get away from the zeitgeist. And as the days were getting closer to my crossing, the intensity of the rhetoric from that other neighboring country where I was like unbelievable. They were telling me that like all these scary stories, you can't cross, there's tensions, you'll never be able to do it, your visa's out of date. Like, it was incredibly in my face. I had to just think, just like cut myself off, think realistically, what's this crossing going to be like? What's the highway going to be like? And I'm like, I think it's all bullshit. I think they're just, but they believe it. When they're telling you, they believe it. I mean, when you're crossing any of these borders, you typically get that. You get this, the closer you get to the border, the closer you get to people that believe that the culture on the other side of the border is all bad and you shouldn't go there and they're terrible people and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, my experience was, there's some hassles and bureaucracies on that side, on the exit side, but on the entry side, it was completely normal. It was like nothing's happening. There wasn't even a single message. They did, I think, pulse my temperature, but that was just like, I don't even know. There was nothing about the virus. There was some posters about Ebola. Nothing. I sat with some like border police while we were processing the visa and organizing transport and things, and they were all just sitting together eating lunch just like normal. So I knew within 100 feet of the border that I had crossed into a country that just didn't buy it completely. That's the good news. The bad news is they could. If they weren't being protected from this media by their leaders, if their leaders weren't taking a stand, this culture could buy it. They haven't thought it through at all. It's almost like some of them want to join the rest of the world, but they don't believe it. But anyway, so I crossed. I'm in a complete sanctuary. I don't really know what's happening. I'm in a very small rural little post here, so I don't really know what's happening in the country, but I can say that in my little experience, no one's buying it. No one's freaking out. There's no fear. It's just relaxed so I can get back on my feet. And I've had some, in terms of getting my head clear, because it was just getting too much. I guess probably most of you are experiencing the same thing. Just everywhere you go, everything you try and do. Can't do that, man. Can't, man. The new superhero is can't, man. And it was like, if you try and fight it, like it just causes you more stress. So it starts to be like, how do I get out of this? Anyway, so I'm lucky. It was a neighboring country. I had no idea how close that border was until I asked, and that was like an hour drive, and I couldn't believe it, how easy it was when the time actually came. I was waiting for my E. Michael Jones book, which I've now gotten into, and I'm completely not disappointed in any way. He's, like I said, throwing fastballs through the strike zone of the fundamental psychology of what's happening. I'll say a few bullet points. I'll share the anecdote, and then a couple bullet points on the Capricorn One movie from the beginning, and then we'll end with the Michael Jones quote. On my last podcast, I predicted that I thought it was going to go the way of Khmer Rouge, that they were going to stir up the mobs against the public intellectuals. That hasn't exactly happened, but I'm not sure what's going to happen next. I have no idea. The second wave discussion, they don't have to do much. They just say something on TV and people do it. So the sort of the fear aspect and the obedience is happening. I don't think they have to create that much. So it's more like the ones that are seeing through it have to be the ones doing the work to wake people up during the calm times. But I did see a post this week that Steven Pinker at Harvard, he's like one of these guys that's got his foot in both camps. He's very connected and popular with sort of the younger crowd and the in crowd and the mainstream. But he also thinks for himself and speaks out against some of this sort of mob mentality. I saw a very long interview between him and Peterson maybe a year ago, and they were very, very closely aligned. So anyway, there's some people declaring that the mobs are going to go after Steven Pinker. So I think that's the first example of the Khmer Rouge Pol Pot going after the public intellectuals that I had said. I can't say my prediction has come true, but that's just one little example where it is. I guess fundamentally, this whole thing, to me, it's just extremely transparent that it brings this dichotomy of our choice of how we want to live. And someone, it might have been Peterson, someone once said that it's helpful to think of humanity psychologically as being half reptile and half unicorn in terms of our instincts. So we've got this reptilian survival instinct, kill or be killed, kind of thing, cold-blooded. And then we've got this other nature that's just like do no harm. To me, that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing some of these bad behaviors I'm seeing as like this reptilian behavior is just thriving. That I think it's an Eskimo story or a Native Indian story. They say that it's the wolf that you feed, or so if you're feeding I think that's what we're up against. The people that are the ultimate perpetrators of this darkness and this tyranny, these people have been feeding their inner reptilian for their whole lives, and that's how they think, and that's how they think everyone else thinks. But if you're more unicorn-minded, you're more do-no-harm-minded, you can't for the life of you imagine somebody who's got this reptilian mindset. To me, that's the fundamental barrier people have. And the question that you get, if you get somebody that can ask a question, most of them aren't asking a question, but if you get someone, the first question is, why would they do that? Why would anyone do that? Why would anyone make up a hoax like that? And why would they get media and governments to cooperate? Why? From a unicorn mindset, it makes no sense. They can't imagine. And so maybe I'll just tell this traffic story I had from December to demonstrate that point, and then we'll wrap up with some of the other observations from the films. So I was December, I was commuting to Bahrain. There's a causeway, so the commute's about 75 minutes. And on the causeway, there's customs and 2 immigration gates, and then customs, and then insurance, and then you're in. Just like crossing from Canada to U.S. or Canada, more like crossing from U.S. to Mexico in terms of the gates and things. And a lot of people do that commute daily. So there's one lane where, for whatever reason, the way they had set it up, it's being fed by 4 gates down the road. So when you're coming to line up, that particular lane on the far right-hand side moves like 5 times faster than all the other lanes. So anyone that does that daily commute notices that and always goes in that lane because it's faster. And because of that, the line is quite a bit longer than all the other ones. So I'm in that lane, and then for some reason during a period, I don't know why this happened, but there was like a group of people, and they knew exactly what they were doing, but they were taking the short lane to get started, and then they were just barging themselves into that other lane. I guess sort of pretending that they didn't know what was happening, but these were like frequent travelers. So I'm part way up on that right side, on that far right side, minding my own business, and I'm actually in a really super good space. I think I'm about to go on Christmas vacation, and I'm just happened to be that day in a really zen space, like absolutely do no harm. My inner unicorn was coming out. I had no animosity towards anybody. I just wanted to get back to Bahrain so I could do a few things. Anyway, I see this guy like really aggressively, and that happens sometimes on my causeway. Just some of the different cultures, they have different protocols, and that's fine. And my attitude usually is, let the local culture. So if Saudis and Bahrainis, let them work it out. Let that if someone is crossing the cultural norms, let that culture call them out. I'll just stay out of it. I decided in this case that I had been going through this for a few days, so I'm like, these guys that are doing the short lane and then trying to barge over, like that's just totally not okay. So I'm just going to stick to the bumper in front of me, and I'm not going to look. I don't even want to know who it is. So that's what I decided to do. I just don't want to provoke anybody, mind my own business, stick to the bumper in front of me, and these guys should leave me alone because I'm in my lane. It's a straight lane. There's no merge happening. So this guy, he's like barging straight into the front of my wheel well, trying to. And I just don't look up. And I assume it's a Saudi, because they can be quite aggressive in the lineup compared to our typical, the way we typically operate in those kinds of merge situations. But this wasn't a merge. So I see this nose coming, and I'm just like, I'm not going to look, and I'm just going to squeeze by this person, and they can just deal with whoever's behind me, because I know that this person does not deserve a spot in front of my car. He doesn't deserve to be in this line. And that's fine. And I got past him. So my nose got past his nose. Our mirrors almost bumped, so I pulled my mirror in. And then once we were past, once I was clear, I just looked up, and I wasn't in an attitude. I didn't even look in his face. I just gave him a thumbs up, like, we're all clear. You know, no scratch, no damage, we didn't hit. You know, like, you'll get the next one. You know, I wasn't giving him any attitude. No provocation. And up until this point, I still thought it was a Saudi. I don't know. It wasn't. It sounds like I provoked him, but I didn't. There was no provocation whatsoever. The guy then accelerated into the side of my vehicle. So my nose was past his nose. And we were past. We were clear. I pulled my mirror in, and I was past. So my mirror was past his mirror. And he accelerated into the side of my vehicle. And so it was a side-by-side sort of crunch and scratch. And I went, what the fuck are you doing? So I look over and I make that face, or I might have mouthed that, you know. Anyway, I keep going because he's now behind me. So I just keep going because he can't get in front of me anymore. He's now behind me. So all he can do is run into the side of my car. And so I keep pulling ahead, and he's now pulled right into the side of my vehicle. So as my vehicle continues to pull ahead, this scratching, banging, collision sound, his mirror hits the side of my car. It like breaks, like, so it's hanging on by the cable. And so I'm past him now. And I'm just like, what the fuck was that? You know? But I also realized, I looked down with the mirror on my car, no damage. All the damage was on his. So he accelerated into the side of my car, and he sort of bounced off of it. It was just luck, just pure dumb luck. And I was like, oh, God, that's hilarious. So now all the damage is his. He was being the ass. He got the damage. I'm 2 car lengths in front of him now. You know, that's it. It's done. I'll never see that guy again as long as I live. And I didn't even get upset. Like, I was just like, what the fuck? That's all I said. So I wasn't even engaged in any conflict whatsoever. So fine. So I'm laughing to myself a little bit. Not out loud, not a face. He couldn't have seen me. I was long gone. I was just saying, God, that's just poetic justice. You know, that's just karma. I'm in this good space. This guy collides into me. He gets all the damage. And now I'm ahead of him in line, and I never have to see him again. Anyway, so the guy, so I think that's it. It's done. We're done, you know? Well, doesn't he, like, decide to make a race out of this? This guy's, like, maybe 10 years younger than me. He decides now to make a race out of this, and he's going to get across the border first or whatever. I'm not paying any attention. I've forgotten about him now. I literally have forgotten about him now. I'm at the gate. I'm at the last gate as you're exiting Saudi Arabia. And the guy gets out of his car. He runs across, no joke, 10 lanes, tells the immigration guy that's taking my passport, to, you know, stamping me out of the country, tells him to seize my passport and hold me and retain me because I ran into his car. Okay? I can't believe this. I'm actually falling over shocked at what's happening at this point. He's a British guy. By now I can tell he's a white British guy, a healthy, athletic, 35, 40-year-old guy. Engineer or something, you know, in an engineering type truck. And I'm like, wow, this is weird. And the immigration guy assumes, well, you must be guilty. I mean, why would anybody make a scene like this unless you're guilty? So, so he does what the guy says. So then they get the passport to the office. So now they've seized my passport. I have to pull over, and they haven't stamped me. So I'm still in the country. I have to pull over. And I have to go into the immigration counter inside. This guy, he's running ahead all the time. Okay, so he's running ahead, and he's telling every officer that will listen that I'm a terrible person. I collided into his car. You got to keep this guy here. He's like, you got to seize his passport. You can't let him cross. You can't let him move. He's you know, like that. And I'm just dumbfounded. Like, I'm absolutely gobsmacked by this whole experience. But the reason I'm telling this story is every single person in the position of authority took his word for granted. They just assumed, why would anyone behave this way if he wasn't wronged. That's what they all were assuming. So every single one of them assumed that I was guilty of something. They all assumed that. So then they has to call this insurance adjusting organization. It's like an agency for the government that's going to come and decide who was at fault. So hours later, okay, this is like a Tuesday night waiting on the Saudi border. It's like the worst waste of time. But I'm still not even upset. I'm just like shocked at what's happening. And this isn't. I don't even think this guy's a bad guy. This is why I'm telling the story. I'll explain a little bit more in a second. So then the adjuster comes. Again, the guy runs out to greet him and tell him what a bad guy I was and all this terrible thing I did to his car and blah, 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 blah. And so again, this guy, even though he's a really nice, friendly, easygoing guy, Saudi guy, he assumes that I must have wronged this guy. He assumes, like, why? Well, why would this guy make a big scene if he's not, if he wasn't wronged? Then there's like some discussion about what happened. We're trying to both explain our case. And this guy's like trumping up the charges, okay? And I said, just look, we don't even have to talk about it. You've got cameras everywhere. Just review the tapes. Just review the tapes. I don't want to get into this. Just review the tapes and then you decide and we'll be on our way, okay? So immediately, everyone around us that heard me and was watching how I was reacting were thinking like a guilty person wouldn't behave this way. You know, a guilty person wouldn't be saying, just go review the tapes. So the guy goes, 10 minutes later comes back. Well, now he's treating me like, now he's treating this as, how do we get out of this situation? You know, how do I just resolve this conflict so we can get out of this situation? Because this guy, there's nobody guilty of anything per se. That's his demeanor now, okay? And so he's just looking at a way to keep the peace and get us out of there. So he ends up looking at the two vehicles, and he had looked at the tapes, and he's like 50-50, 50-50. Like, he just wants to get out of it because he could see that I was innocent. He could see on the videos that I was innocent. And of course, if it's 50-50, you don't need to wait for 2.5 hours in the middle of the night in an immigration counter in Saudi Arabia in the middle of nowhere, right? I mean, if it's 50-50, we just take care of our business ourselves. So the last thing the guy says is, the other guy, the British guy, says, yeah, we needed it. I said, so why don't you just, like, can we just drop this whole case, forget the whole thing, just move on with our lives, and just drop it? No, man, we need it. We need it for insurance. So my point is this, and I think this is the mechanism that's happening. This is what we're seeing. We all have this reptile, and we all have this unicorn. That guy had some overblown sense of himself relative to me. I mean, I don't think it was personal exactly, but he believed he was entitled to do what he was doing, even though he was completely in the wrong. But he had convinced himself that he was entitled to behave this way, and then he just completely tried to reshape reality to support that belief. The bigger point is this presumed guilty thing. So this guy's probably in normal work office situation, he's probably a pretty normal guy, but he was just so convinced that he was untouchable, essentially, or above the law. Maybe you can say that, above like right and wrong. Like if he decides he's going to belong there, then he's going to belong there, and it's everyone's job to just bend down to him. So this is what I think is going on with this presumed guilty thing. The first thing is a very kind of naive child. Okay, so now I'm talking about the immigration people that all presumed that what he was, that the accusation he was making must be true, because why would he make it? Okay, there's so many levels that's happening with that particular issue. The first one is just a childlike innocence. Why would somebody lie about something like that? Why would they react this way if there was no wrongdoing? Okay, that's just like this extremely childlike innocence. The next one is, I want no drama. These guys are like, I want no drama. I want the absolute minimum. So the absolute minimum is just agree with this guy and get him out of here. You know, if any one of them had some honor, they would just ask a simple question. Like, they would just turn to me and say, you know, is any of this true? You know, but they want, so it's just easier with a false accusation to just completely, if it's strong enough, just completely go along with it. But there's one other aspect that I think is also going on with this whole zeitgeist, and that is this concept of the German concept of Schadenfreude. You know, this that taking joy in other people's downfall. I don't know. The example, I mean, you know, you can be cheering for the Leafs and the Habs are your ultimate enemy. In Montreal, hockey I'm talking about in the playoffs. And the Habs get beat out in the first round, and you're happy that somebody else has suffered a failure like that, okay? So that's sort of, to me, that's sort of playful and normal and natural. It's not like you're gonna, it's just like your rival just dropped the ball, and so you just a tiny little bit of glee. That's just sports playfulness. Yeah, so what I imagine in this, imagine you're in this tense situation. Maybe it's an interview or something. And you looking around, maybe there's like 6 candidates all sitting in a waiting room. And one of them is obnoxious or even half drunk or half hungover or is just debauched in some way. Well, everyone else is going to be relieved, okay? That person's now the fool. So now I don't have to, it's like it lets off the tension when something bad happens to someone else in that situation. So I think that there is a massive, this is all connecting, okay? These millennials and people that think like that, it's not all millennials. There's like people, middle age, all ages. They want to be let off the hook, okay? They don't want to be responsible for their own freedom. They're even a little bit uncomfortable with freedom. So when they see someone else getting caged, it's like this little schadenfreude, this little lift. And I really, like, I've never had my head in that headspace. I've never taken any glee in another person being persecuted or imprisoned or presumed guilty wrongfully. I mean, why? It doesn't make any sense. But I'm seeing that everywhere. So these guys that are taking photos of you not wearing your mask, or snitches, the neighbors doing the snitches, it's like they're already down. Maybe they gave up on life. Maybe they gave up on freedom. Maybe they gave up on responsibility a long time ago. And they just want everyone else in the shit with them. And now you're seeing it again with these protests against tradition, against statues, against history, against all things that are successful in the West. It's like they don't want to play that game. They resent the game. They resent that there's a opportunity out there. All they have to do is go get it. They'd rather tear it all down. They'd rather tear it all down and have everyone just buried and starving in the dust together. So I am shocked. I'm constantly shocked at how often I'm running into people that are disturbed by someone's got a free mind, got a free attitude, going for a free walk in nature or what have you. I can't tell you how often people sort of smell it on me that I'm thinking freely and I'm talking freely, and they want to like double check who owns your chains, you know? Like, do you own a mask? They'll ask for no reason, out of nowhere. Do you own a mask? Like, they want to make sure that that you're also a slave, or are you still working for XYZ? You know, like they want to make sure someone owns your chains, because pure freedom makes them uncomfortable. They've given up on their freedom at some point, and they feel better if everyone else's freedom is taken away. And I think that's what the dynamic was on that Bahrain causeway. It was an absolute shock to me, and I don't think that guy is probably a bad guy. It's just that somehow I provoked his inner reptile, and he had some sort of delusion of his superiority in that situation, which I still don't fully. Plus, he's driving a company vehicle. He wants to get the insurance. He needs a perpetrator. He needs to blame somebody. You know, on and on and on. But I just couldn't believe how quick everyone was to want to believe that I was guilty, without asking a single question. That was just shocking, because I didn't look any more guilty than anyone. I just looked like a passerby, you know. So that's my little story of what I think is happening. In terms of Capricorn One, that was a favorite film of mine when I was a kid. I have no idea why. It was 1977. I was only 10 in 1977. I saw it in the theater with my cousin, so maybe I saw it when I was 11 and he was 13. It's really strange to me that I was completely resonating with a conspiracy movie at the age of 11. The resurrection aspect of it, well, you could kind of hear from the quotes. But basically, you've got these guys that are heroes of the mainstream, right? They've been propped up to be these heroes, these Weetabix box people, and they're going to go to Mars. And then they realize the whole thing's a sham, and they're pawns. And now And this is the schism that I was talking about, that happening with medical people. It happens with police. It happens with military. They get completely, if you get trapped with your image, if you get attached to your image, you get completely torn down the middle, because soon reality catches up to this. This isn't actually, your behavior isn't matching the image. So now it turns out you're just a complete stooge. You're a pawn in someone else's game. Now, you have a choice. Do you want to go along with it, which is a reptile, right? Or do you want to stick to your principles and maybe even disappoint your own wife and kids by standing up and saying this thing is a whole sham, and my whole image has been built on a sham. So he goes through the star, James Brolin, Joss Brolin's dad. He goes through this whole journey of realizing that he's a pawn in someone else's game, and they've got a whole lot of time. They've got tons of time to think about it and argue about it with the other astronauts. And then he decides that freedom and honesty, and being with the family is more important than the sham that he was a part of. And they have a cave scene, and they have a Scorpio scene, and they have a snake scene. There seems to be always that symbolism comes into it. And the other aspect of it is the 70s. There's something so nostalgic about the old technology, like the old rotary dial phone and the tape messaging machine, and the guys are playing pool at a bar, and the guy gets a phone call at the bar, which is the way it used to be. Something really, really nostalgic about that. But basically, there they are. They're the controllers of the cultural controllers, or cultural engineers, are telling you exactly how they do things, exactly how they manipulate the media, and exactly how they take innocent people and they prop them up into an image that they can't escape from, and then they're torn right down the middle. They don't know, and then when they try and be honest, if they ever do try, they just get completely ruined in the press. So they know they're just in a trap. I think that's what's happening with a lot of the people that get quote unquote suicided. I hope you enjoy this clip from E. Michael Jones. It was a 60-minute talk he did about 10 years ago on C-SPAN, and I've had a very hard time picking out. It's so good, the whole 60 minutes, but I'll just pick out the best 10 minutes I think that's most relevant and share it here. And it's good to be back in touch, and I'll share the links on the page. All right, thanks. I'm Neil McDougall, and as painful as it is, Logos is definitely rising.
This is not typical Indiana. So anyway, he says to me, no, I want to see this thing right away. And I said, well, Jack, why should I show you this article? He said, in the interest of fairness and objectivity. And I said, Jack, when was this place ever fair or objective with me? And he said, well, we think you're going to distort things in the article. And I said, Jack, all I'm going to do is tell the truth. At that point, he exploded. Remember, the door's open? All the secretaries are out there. He says to me, truth, with the cigar in one hand and the lighter flicking in the other. Truth, bullshit. Truth, bullshit. He's screaming this at the top of his lungs. I mean, even Pontius Pilate didn't go that far. At least Pontius Pilate asked a question, And I remember thinking at that time, why is this guy going on this way? What did I do to deserve this? All I said was I was going to tell the truth. Well, I learned then that the truth is a very sensitive topic for a lot of different reasons. Now, I didn't understand quite why it should be such a sensitive topic in this guy's life, but I found out later on. I mean, the question, I left the office thinking, why does he hate the truth? Why does he think that the truth is bullshit? Why is he making this type of correlation? And I kept that in my mind for a number of, it's still in my mind, but I kept it in my mind for a number of years, and then suddenly I heard that Jack was leaving. He had resigned suddenly. Now, the reason you read in the paper was not really the reason that everyone else knew. The reason he resigned suddenly was because he was having an affair with one of the deans, and the people in the college found out about it, and the news was just about to get out, so he left before it would happen. Now, I think that this was a revelation to me. I think that what I learned here is that people who are sensitive about the truth are sensitive for very particular reasons. And I think that's the reason a lot of people feel the same way about the truth. So I sort of left, I sort of shook the dust off my feet, and I walked away, and I had two projects in mind. I thought, something happened to Catholic education because I shouldn't have been fired for opposing abortion, okay? So I decided to find out what happened to Catholic education. And I also tried to find out, let's figure out the difference. There seems to be a connection between the way people live and the way people think. Now, the first question I think I answered in a book which you can get out there called John Cardinal Crowell and the Cultural Revolution, which is basically about how the Catholic Church got subverted during the Cultural Revolution of the 60s. That's a long story, and I'm not going to go into it now. The other question is the relationship between truth and action. I started a magazine, Fidelity, which dealt mostly with the Catholic stuff. But during this period, I started reading biographies of people that I had known, been taught as an undergraduate. The big difference between when I was an undergraduate and when Adam, my son, was an undergraduate is that people believed modernity in the 60s. They lived it and they believed all those stuff as the God's honest truth. And by the time Adam got to Harvard, they had to enforce that, and that's the essence of what political correctness is. So I started reading biographies. I read a biography. In other words, the lives of these people seemed to me to provide an explication of their texts in a way that the texts did not themselves. So suddenly I had a revelation here, okay? That basically what we're talking about here is projection. This was Margaret Mead's guilty conscience, and she made a career out of it because a lot of other people had the same guilty conscience. All the liberated ladies at Barnard in the 1920s loved Margaret Mead's book because it said, in the state of nature, there's no guilt, and you can commit adultery, and there's no problem attached to it. I found that just about every modern thinker of the type I had studied as an undergraduate had this sort of skeleton in his closet. And I tried, as a result of that, to come up with some type of formulation of this idea. What were we talking about here? And it seems to me that in keeping with this conference, you have two options in life, at least intellectual options. You can either conform your desires to the truth, or you can conform the truth to your desires. And it seems to me that just about every modern thinker that I came up with, now that the biographies were coming out, had chosen the latter course. They had decided to suppress the truth because it didn't conform to their desires. So Sigmund Freud would say all men have a desire to sleep with their mothers and their sisters. All men, Sigmund? I found that hard to swallow when I first heard it, and then suddenly the story of Freud's relationship with his sister came out, and suddenly this became somewhat more understandable. I'm saying the thesis of the book is that modernity is modernity is rationalized sexual misbehavior, and we now live at the tail end of modernity, and so the university system is nothing more than an elaborate rationalization of sexual misbehavior. Now, why would you want to do this? Aldous Huxley wrote a book called Means and Ends, in which he gives some indication. He said, my generation, meaning the English generation in the 30s, the people who all became communists and from which the Blunts and the spies came from, he said, my generation believed in meaninglessness, but we believed in meaninglessness for a very special reason, because we were all interested in sexual liberation. In other words, if it was meaningless, then there was no guilt attached to it. In other words, we are ready to kill meaning to let our guilty consciences off the hook. And I'm saying that the only thing that's different between Huxley and all the people who came after him is that Huxley was honest enough to admit it. Because I think that this gets to the heart of what we're talking about when we're talking about truth on campus. The heart of what we're talking about here is that there is a connection between what you do and what you think. As a matter of fact, I think that the essence of the Western tradition is that understanding. That if you want to talk about it in its most metaphysical terms, we strive to know what is true, and we strive to achieve what is good. But that those two things are ultimately united at the end. That the true and the good, in a sense, are one and the same thing. And that if you violate one, you violate the other. If you turn your back on one, if you decide that I do not want the good, then you can't want the true either. But what we're talking about here is the deliberate extinction. The deliberate extinction of the truth. The deliberate darkening of the mind. Now, the classic authors knew that lust had something to do with this. They would say that lust darkens the mind. In other words, passion. The mind is like a window. And if you don't perceive, if it's not clean, you can't see through it. In other words, you can't get to reality through the mind. The way we think depends on the kind of person we are. We can only apprehend the truth to the extent that we live the truth. And living the truth means conforming our actions to the truth. And conforming our actions to the truth means living according to the moral law, which is the truth about human nature. People who are teaching our children who have made the decision that their desire is the most important thing in the world. Now, how do you deal with people like that? The goal of the control of the educational system, the ultimate goal, is the control of your sexual life. That, it seems to me, is the genius of this system. If you can control, if we can determine from an early age how you will behave sexually, we will determine how you behave. We don't have to put a gun to your head. We will simply know that you will behave in certain predictable fashions. And this is why I think the educational system is wedded to the propagation of vice, because vice means control. I'm doing a book now on Frankenstein, and I think that's the essence of Frankenstein. That monster is the sexual license that you let onto the world. That monster is your unrepented sins, and it will never die. We live in a culture that creates monsters and then looks on in shock when the monsters do what monsters do. In this sense, we live in a culture that goes back to a warning all the way at the beginning of our culture. I'm thinking of a play by Euripides called The Bacchae. If you're familiar with that play, it's about the women have left their looms, so it's kind of a play about feminism. The women have all left their looms. They're off on the mountainside dancing naked, watching the Asiatic, or worshiping the Asiatic god Dionysus. And Pentheus, who is an intelligent man, he's the king of Thebes. He realizes that this is not a private issue when women take off their clothes and dance on the mountain. There is social order involved in this thing, and he as the king is responsible for social order, and so he has to do something. He has to apprehend Dionysus, which is, of course, what he does. It's easy to capture Dionysus. He brings him into his throne room, and Dionysus says, "Your armies have no power over me," and the king kind of smirks. And then Dionysus shows the king why his armies have no power. He says to him, "Would you like to see the women dancing naked on the mountainside?" In other words, he appeals to the king's prurient interest. And the king, as a matter of fact, would like to see the women dancing naked on the mountainside. And so Dionysus says, "Well, I'll take you there, but you've got to do one thing. You have to put on a dress." So the king puts on a dress, and he marches through the town and sort of ruins his authority by walking around like this. But Pentheus climbs the tree, the women see him, and then they rush over and they bring him down, and they tear him limb from limb. In the final scene of the play, Pentheus's grandfather is standing there, and he says to this woman, "What do you see?" Now, the woman is sitting there with Pentheus's head in her lap. The woman happens to be Pentheus's mother. But she's still under this kind of feminist Dionysian intoxication. She says, "It's a trophy. It's a lion's head. It's something great." And her father says, "Look again." And then the intoxication starts to wear off. And she looks down and she realizes it's the head of her son. And she says, great line, he says, "What do you see?" And she says, "I see horror. I see suffering. I see grief." That's what we see right now. That's what academia is all about right now. But on the other side of the coin, there is the sense that maybe the intoxication is wearing off.
They won't let